There are some fairly key updates to the program that we would like all our network to be appraised of, and we will endeavour to continue doing these semi-regularly where there are any updates. If you do have specific questions around your own circumstances, make sure that you talk to a professional about those. My name is Jack. I'm the head of R&D Tax and Grants here at Fullstack. So thank you everyone for joining. On the agenda today, I'm going to provide an update to goings on around R&D tax and compliance. In contrast to often these updates, there is a little bit of movement and something to talk about today. So I'm going to update you on the current ATO and DISR focus areas, how we can reduce the risk of non-compliance, and provide just some quick updates to the grant landscape. I've just included a couple of slides here as a bit of background, just a recap of the R&D tax program. I'm not going to go through those, but they'll be included in the broadcast and any slide decks that we send out. But in terms of the program updates, we're now in our second year of the RDTI transparency report being released yearly. Last year, they released a transparency report for FY 2022 claims. So they published the names and of all the applicants of the program and also the total spend per company for each of those companies. The 2023 list is set to be released later this year in September, and that'll be a yearly process, in part because of the release of the FY22 list. There was a fair bit of commentary in the media around some fairly large claims for gambling and tobacco companies, which got a little bit of negative press there. The government has announced their intention to restrict companies' ability to claim gaming and tobacco-related activities. That will need to be legislated. It's not something that they can just enact without putting that through the legislation. That has not yet been put to Parliament, but if it does pass, that will apply from 1 July 2025. The other thing to note is just that the random sample review on FY 2022 claims has been completed. So that was late January, early February this year. As a quick recap, there were 200 companies out of around 12,000 claimants for FY22 were subject to a random review, both on the technical and or the financial side. Pending, we had 2 of those which have been resolved in January, February, and broadly the ATO and DISR identified some fairly significant issues with how people were claiming and potentially what they were claiming. They provided some details around that, whereby 1 in 4 claimants were initially placed in a medium to high risk of non-compliance category. So on the basis of that, we are seeing some increased activities, which I'll run you through. So on the ATO side, so on the financial side, these two kind of having financial activity is still currently fairly separate to having activity on the technical side. Over recent years, they have been looking at ways to kind of streamline and bring those closer together, but at the moment they are still fairly separate. You'll either get reviewed or audited on the financial side or reviewed on the technical side. But the 2025-2026 federal government has included almost $1 billion over 4 years to extend and expand tax compliance activities. Now that's obviously not all R&D. Possibly a small portion of that would be on R&D, but nonetheless, we are seeing an increase in compliance activities already over the last 6 months or so. One of the major kind of changes to what we've seen previously is there has been a real increase on real-time checking of claims, particularly with claims with certain characteristics. So if you have high levels of associate expenditure or your claim is made up solely of associate expenditure, if you have foreign-owned R&D or an overseas finding, they are looking into some of those claims in more detail. The real-time checking aspect, it means that they're doing checks after you submit your tax return, including the R&D tax schedule, but prior to the release of the refund. So generally, you would submit your application, submit your R&D tax schedule. That would be processed with little to no checking, as in checking coming to you and asking more questions. And then the audit or review activity would come further down the track, but they are doing a little bit more real-time checking at the moment. We have found that, and broadly in the consulting community, there's been a little bit of chat around the length of time that some of these are taking. I believe that the ATO was a little bit overextended. They sent out all these review notices, and then I found that there was a lot more work required than they thought. people have gone on holidays or been moved departments and things like that. So we experienced a few delays like that. They can go on for quite a long time. So companies need to be really prepared if they do get these checks that they have kind of everything ready to go to deliver to the ATO straight away, rather than kind of having to go and backfill. That is also, a potential compliance risk if you're having to go back and scramble. Then not providing them exactly what they asked for can lead to escalation. And just a final point there, we are still waiting on some additional guidance products from the ATO that we'll make available when they become available. So just a few points on financial record keeping and how to reduce your risk of non-compliance. People often ask, how do you avoid reviews and audits? Really, there's no way to, aside from, no correct way to, aside from not claiming or, claiming lower amounts. But generally, ATO isn't too concerned around the size of the claim. It's whether you can substantiate the claim. People often think that ATO is out there trying to take back money and things like that. But really, if you can provide evidence in a timely fashion that you have taken due care to calculate the actual cost of those activities and you can substantiate those, then they're pretty happy accepting that and not finding any issues with your claim. So one of the main areas that they look at, and certainly for an increasing amount of companies that are especially involved in software development where time, employee salaries are a major expenditure category. Time allocation is very, very important. It always has been, but, over time, the kind of being your ability to say, oh, this is our first year, kind of maybe a couple of years ago, that was a little bit more leniency there, but there is plenty of information out there to make people aware that they from first day, they need to be able to substantiate time. So not only do you need to substantiate the time, you need to split those to registered activities and tie back individuals to those activities. So, you might have a time allocation, a table of all the time, but then you must have the ability for a given period to say, well, Jack, they were working on core activity 1, and in particular, they were doing these steps. That's especially important for C-level founders, admin staff, people that may not have a high R&D percentage, people that are genuinely engaged in R&D activities and do nothing else, where they're 100%. It's a little bit easier to justify with a lower level of granularity in timesheets, for example. But timesheets are always the best. In terms of other financial records, sometimes overlooked are contracts for associates, invoices for associates. If someone owns multiple companies and they're contracting between each other, sometimes, because it might just be one person or a group of the same people, some of those records might not be, they could even not be in place in some circumstances. But you really need to get on top of all those things. Make sure you have contracts with the founders, employee agreements with the founders that set out what their roles and responsibilities are. That will save a lot of headache further down the track. The ATO is focused a lot on, as always, about apportionment methodologies as well. So when you're going through and doing the cost calculation, you really need to drill down into each individual item and see how that can be applied to the R&D. So moving on, going to talk a little bit about the new DISR compliance framework. So that is a new compliance model that's being rolled out from 1 July 2025. If people may be a little bit confused, DISR, that is the new, so we used to say Oz Industry, so they would administer the technical side of the program. That's no longer a department, so the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, DISR, now administers the program. So there's a new compliance model being rolled out from 1 July. There is a new application form coming in August. A little bit frustrating that it wasn't available for since the new financial year started. It's always a little bit fraught bringing it in mid-period. So we haven't had any. There's no sample form or anything. I believe that'll just become live and be the new form. So we'll see what's in there. Part of that is, I believe, so they can conduct more automated checks. So the last point there, they are introducing some automated systems that will be implemented for the next peak period that will be used to identify high-risk claimants. Now, we don't know what those are, what those are at this stage. Presumably, there'll be some large language models or some AI in there. Some other updates are, so there is now a one-strike policy for determining eligibility. That is where in the past, if they started some review activity and went on to make a finding, they would make a finding on, the new knowledge test, the experimental process test, the unknown outcomes test. But now, if they determine that you are ineligible on one of those, then there's no need to go through and make a finding on those other tests. So that will speed up these processes quite a bit. And then there are no more education visits moving forward. So what they used to do before instituting reviews was on occasion come out and meet people and make sure that there was a legitimate business, give a bit of education, some guidance, etc. That's no more. And alongside that, there are no more risk assessments that will be provided prior to a formal assessment. So that was just a guidance kind of product that they would provide, where they would say, we've conducted a review, we've found that you're not kind of meeting these risks, so there's no escalation at this point. But there were a couple of cases where that caused a bit of confusion, whereby the company then thought that the activities that they were conducting were eligible, and later on a finding was made saying no, they're actually not eligible. So just cleaning up some of that confusion there. On the technical side of record keeping, so there is a greater ability to avoid review activity on a technical level. So I mentioned that you can't really avoid it on a financial level. Either you get picked because you made a certain threshold or not. On the technical side, the quality of that information in the application form is a big determinator. Will determine in part whether you receive review activity. And certainly that seems like with some of those automated systems that will be focused. So there's kind of two sides on technical compliance, and there is providing clear information in the application form, actually addressing the questions asked, making sure your hypotheses are activity specific and not broad project objectives. I still see a lot of people that are self-claiming and potentially being assisted by other consultants still have very broad hypotheses that are more akin to project objectives rather than specific technical or scientific hypotheses. And that's been a big focus and something that DISR, previously Oz Industry, has banged on for a long time, and people still kind of struggle with that. So I also just would say that when you're preparing the information for your application form, for your project description, large language models and AI tools can be a great time saver, but just not having any records and then at the end of the year just plugging in some keywords into an LLM and asking it to write you a project description is potentially high risk if you don't have the records to substantiate those claims that you've made. So, no matter how good your application form is, there is still a chance that you'll be reviewed. And then at that point, you would need all that documentation to support the claims that you've made. If you are going through review activities, really important things are to contemporaneous, i.e. records that are made at the time that the activities are conducted are seen much more favorably than records that are prepared after the fact. You need evidence that shows compliance with each requirement, so the new knowledge, the unknown outcomes, the experiments, etc. So they will potentially ask for documents that support each of those. When you ask questions, you need to respond to the question. So, if you're unable to answer the question and you don't answer it, then they'll ask you again. And then if you can't answer it, then generally it'll be escalated. So you really need to make sure that you answer exactly what and produce exactly what is requested from you. Documentation and support and prepare the initial claims and support review activity can be formal or informal. So just about making sure that you have a kind of a wide range of documents that show compliance with each of those requirements. So I've covered a lot of these already, but just some kind of general tips. My most successful clients are ones that have an R&D champion that's really driving the process. Usually potentially a finance manager or head of R&D. They can make sure that people are filling in their timesheets or time allocation records, having regular updates on the progress and the status, and ideally talking to their consultants regularly, making sure that any new activities are assessed and scoped accordingly, that any preparation of, or the records are generated that support those claims and make the end of year process a lot easier, but also enable engagement with any review or compliance activities to make that a lot smoother process. With that forward planning, doing forecasting, budgeting, etc., you can get a better idea of how much return there is going to be at the end of the year, and you can make sure that you pay your associates before the financial year and that all that documentation is in place. And just reiterating that ability to avoid ATO activity is limited, but certainly for certain claimants, like if you have a large amount of associate expenditure, I would recommend that those claims are prepared on the basis that you will be reviewed with that in the back of the mind, so that you're, as soon as you get that review letter, you can respond within 24 hours with exactly what they want. And an experienced consultant will, should know exactly what it's generally the same kind of questions. It's just a pro forma kind of thing. Provide this. So an experienced consultant that's gone through this process a couple of times should be well equipped to immediately address or reply to those reviews. So we have gone a little bit over, so I'll just race through the grants update. So there's just some kind of basic information about grants. They can be either entitlement programs or kind of competitive and merit-based. So entitlement programs like the Export Market Development Grant, for example, if you meet the criteria, you will, as long as there's still money in the pool, you'll receive those funds. They're generally smaller, and then you have generally larger competitive merit-based grants where you're competing for a particular round of funding. There might be $20 million, and there might be so many applications, and you're competing directly or potentially competing against other companies for a fixed pool of funding. So you need to make sure that you are really kind of well placed for those large grants. Generally, they do go through often now they go through two stages. So there's a lighter touch stage one, or expression of interest or advisory services, that is easier to prepare. And then that's how they kind of weed out a lot of the people that aren't going to be competitive or that don't meet the criteria. Those larger competitive grants often require match funding. So for every dollar that the government puts in, you need a dollar in the bank or committed from investors or project partners or that kind of thing. You'll find if you go through this process a couple of times, the merit criteria is fairly similar. It is worth kind of looking into the process to start to understand what will be required. So like you need a market opportunity value proposition, you need a project plan, potentially a budget, you need to demonstrate your ability to carry out the project successfully, have match funding, etc. And so once you have a handle on that, it'll make applying for different grants a lot easier. So just a question around, is there any kind of template to record activity that we can use? Yeah, so people will have their own templates. We can certainly provide some templates. The kind of most important things are ideally a timesheet, some kind of time tracking template that's done contemporaneously. That can be quite simple. Like you can just do that in an Excel document or something like that. On the technical side, there are templates like that as well. I generally recommend doing a competitor analysis, a technology search, saving that. Again, that can be quite formal or informal. And then you could have a fairly standard template to record your experiments and things like that. So there are certainly templates out there, and we can provide our clients templates where they need those. So just a little bit of a grant snapshot. So this is definitely not exhaustive, but these are some of the grants that we and our clients most applicable to us. So there's the Export Market Development Grant. A lot of these, I won't go through all of these individually. A lot of these are currently closed. Will potentially open up again next year or next funding period. And you will see that there's a kind of a split there between federal programs and state programs. So the MVP, the Ignite Ideas, the Innovation Booster, they're all state. A lot of the states have their own kind of small kind of MVP commercialization kind of grant. And then at the larger level, they're generally quite targeted. So the Medical Research Future Fund, ARENA, renewables, that kind of thing, defense. The industry growth program is the most broad-based in terms of companies from most industries are able to access that, but they must be involved in manufacturing. So all the projects around manufacturing for that. On the previous slide, Grant Connect is a useful searchable database of federal and state government grants. It's a government website, Grant Connect. That is generally a resource that I use if I'm doing research on grants for particular areas, you can search using keywords, industries and things like that. And just finally, not a grant, but something that is useful for a lot of our clients and people that are doing R&D, those kind of early stages, is the ESIC program. So I won't go through that, but essentially it provides your investors in early stage innovation companies with some pretty good incentives. So a 20% non-refundable tax offset capped at $200,000 per investor per year, and a CGT-free window for investments that are disposed of after holding for 12 months, but before 10 years. So if you're not familiar with that, I've just included that. It is worth something researching if you are in those early stages and you're looking for investors. Often they'll ask you whether you're an ESIC. That's generally a trigger when people come to us asking for more help, is when their investors have asked for those. So should the time tracking sheet report time allocation monthly, weekly, quarterly, or annually? Best practice is weekly, or best practice would be daily. Weekly is probably okay. In the last couple of reviews that we have done, we have provided summaries, or the client has provided weekly for every relevant employee, a weekly timesheet allocation to each registered activity. But then we've also had to provide for a month period, let's say, some more granular detail that then backs that up. So my advice would be to do it weekly. Like daily 6-minute time intervals, like a lot of accountants do, for billing purposes, is probably not required at that level of granularity. But the less granular you go, like monthly, is starting to get probably not sufficiently detailed for the ATO. I personally haven't tested that. All the compliance activities that we've been involved with, we've been able to provide weekly and daily kind of time allocation. I would have a guess that the ATO wouldn't particularly like monthly timesheets without more granular detail to back those up. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any specific questions. We're always happy to chat.